All right, we have a mock draft with a special guest. It is none other than Bengal. And with Bengal joining the channel today, Bengal, be prepared to tell everybody in your family you are now tied for the most guest appearances on the channel with, count them, 2. So
That's
Bengal, welcome to the channel.
Who's number 2? Who am I tied with?
You were tied with a fellow New Jerseyan, former New Jerseyan in your case, Connor Rogers of the NFL Stock Exchange.
I've heard of him.
Yes, so big stuff today. So
that's a elite company.
It is. So I actually forgot to ask before we started, do you want the odds or evens?
I would like the odd picks.
Okay. Well, you're on the clock.
All right. I'm going to go Abdul Carter at number 1 here. I think it's really a coin flip. What I always say is that if you're picking at number 1, even in a weaker quarterback class, it's got to be pretty tempting to take that quarterback, because if it works out, if you can develop them, they're just going to be more valuable than any other position you could take here. And that's kind of the way the draft often works, is you take the valuable positions with the high upside guys. I do recognize this could absolutely be a quarterback, but today I'm going to go with Abdul Carter.
I like it. And I also, there's a chance that they go with, any of the guys in free agency, whether it's Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers. I wouldn't think Russ, but they're probably going to spend premium in free agency. Now, with the Browns at pick 2, I think there's a chance Myles Garrett gets traded, like a big chance that he gets traded this offseason. So I think with the Browns, I think their selection at this point is either Abdul Carter, since he's not there in this mock. I think they're going to go with Cam Ward. And I think the reason that I would go Cam Ward here is because, if you take Cam Ward, you can kind of start to flush the Deshaun Watson out of the picture. The money's still going to be there, but you don't really have to think about it. You can get really excited about a nice young quarterback. And I really like the idea of Kevin Stefanski having a chance at developing his own young quarterback, because since he's got there, it was Baker Mayfield, which was not his guy, and then trading multiple first-round picks plus the salary dump for Deshaun Watson. And I like the idea of Cam Ward going to Cleveland, and maybe this doesn't necessarily apply to the Browns, but you don't know when you're going to be selecting in the top 2 again, and you hope that you don't draft in the top 2 again. So ultimately, I'm going to go with Cam Ward at number 2.
I think it's easy to get excited about any quarterback when Deshaun Watson is the alternative. That gives me an interesting choice here at number 3. I am a Giants fan. I don't have anything in the background that would indicate that, because I don't want anyone to know. It's embarrassing. It's a 50-50 for me. Travis Hunter, if you want the best player available, I don't think it's even close. Or Shedeur Sanders, because you feel like you're forced into taking a quarterback. I'm going to do what I want here, and I'm going to go with Travis Hunter over Shedeur Sanders. I think the Giants might be in a position where they feel like they need to take the quarterback, but I like Hunter more. I'm not enamored by any of these QBs. Travis Hunter with upside to upgrade a couple of different positions for the Giants. Could use a receiver, but could absolutely use a true CB1, and that's what Travis Hunter is.
So I do have one question. I actually this was one that I had written down, that I had definitely in the back of my head here. How do you feel about, just generally speaking as a Giants fan, just in general, nothing related to this class, but Ole Miss quarterbacks? Eli Manning, multiple time Super Bowl champion, and just hypothetically, how do you feel about Ole Miss quarterbacks?
I think you got to scout the player, not the helmet.
Okay. All right. Good answer. So with the Patriots here, I would like to go Travis Hunter. Free agency this is a pre-combine mock. I know T. Higgins was recently franchise tagged. I don't think he's completely untradeable at this point. But I think the Patriots are going to address the O-line in a big way in free agency, and also address the receiver market. So I think there's a chance they bring in Ronnie Stanley in free agency, even Cam Robinson as well. And I'm going to go with Tetairoa McMillan. I have mocked them Will Campbell multiple times before, but I'm going to go with Tetairoa McMillan today. Give Drake May another weapon. This would presumably be in a scenario where they do not bring in T. Higgins and then have 2 big, 6'3", 6'4" receivers, although that wouldn't be a bad option by any means. But good football player, good receiver, upgrade a unit that desperately needs it, and help your young quarterback out in the process.
I like that. Typically here for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I just like to go best player available. It's often Mason Graham. However, this is not my channel today. I'm going to get hate anyway, so I'll double down. I'm going to do something I never do. I'm going to go Will Campbell from LSU. I think there's a chance he goes at number 4 to the Patriots. And the Jags need to upgrade on the offensive line. Take a guy like Campbell that can move inside to guard and be one of the better guards in the league. if he develops properly. I think you protect Trevor Lawrence. You could make the most out of Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk for another year or two, depending on their contracts. I know Gabe Davis you have for the next 2, and I think Campbell, or it should be Christian Kirk, you have for the next 1. There are void years on the end. It's a little bit weird, but Campbell I never see to the Jacksonville Jaguars, but I think there's a chance he is best player available at a position of need. I prefer Mason Graham typically, but I'm going to mix it up today.
I like the mix up, and I also like the approach of mixing it up on somebody else's channel. I do like the spiciness, if you will. Now, to go back to with the Raiders here at 6, obviously we have no idea how the free agency is going to play out. We would, I mean, everybody would imagine that they're going to go big on a quarterback at this point, and they obviously addressed the trenches last year in free agency with Christian Wilkins. Their offensive line is pretty good. DJ Glaze had a solid rookie season, and Colton Miller's, of course, Colton Miller. Jackson Powers Johnson, big fan. I don't think the situation, assuming they get a decent quarterback, is all that bad to bring in Ashton Jeanty. And they have pick 37. They have pick 68. I think Ashton Jeanty would be a more impactful player with their first round pick than basically what I'm saying is have Ashton Jeanty at pick 6, and that would be more impactful than kind of what the Chargers were thought of doing last year with Malik Neighbors and then an offensive lineman in the second round, although they ended up going Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey. See what the thought process here? I think Ashton Jeanty would be more impactful than a second round running back for the Raiders, or even third round. So Jeanty is a really good prospect, and they could still go receiver in round 2. And that's where I'm going to go. That's why I'm going to go with Jeanty at pick 6 here.
And there's so few blue chip players in this draft. I feel like it's hard to pass on one if one is available. And that makes things really easy for me with the Jets at number 7. I'm just going to go Mason Graham, best player available at this point, and the Jets could use help on the interior defensive line. I just don't think you're going to be able to pass on Mason Graham if he's available here. I mean, he's likely a top 5 player in the draft. So, I mean, how can you not?
I would agree with that. Love the pairing of Quinnen Williams and Mason Graham. And I think, when we watch or go back to the Super Bowl that was just played a couple weeks ago, everybody knew, trenches always matter. And that's kind of been like a theme that I've had this mock draft season, is that trenches are everything. They're everything. And that was kind of reemphasized in the Super Bowl. And if you can have a dominating interior presence of both Big Q and Mason Graham, why not go for it? And then with the Panthers here at pick 8, I'm very much under the belief that Ejiro Evero is not a bad defensive coordinator. He just simply didn't have talent last year. And when you look at that roster throughout most of the year, it was lacking, whether it was due to injuries, whether it was not having good football players on the team, at least enough good football players. So I'm going to go with Mike Green from Marshall. I think he will tear it up at the combine. That's actually going to be a bold prediction. I love Mike Green. He was extremely productive in his final year at Marshall. He tore up the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, and he is kind of what we did with the Raiders at pick 6, kind of what you did with the Giants. You're bringing in a good football player and not overthinking the process.
Yeah, we've seen what Evero can do as DC with, Denver a couple of years ago. So, I definitely think it was a lack of talent issue, and it didn't get much better. Shaq Thompson is gone now as of today. Not that he was going to be a long-term, fit anyway, but yeah, the defense somehow got even worse today. Mike Green, I do think, makes it better. And that would have been in play for the Saints at number 9. Brandon Staley, now the new defensive coordinator in New Orleans. We're so used to them liking a specific type of edge rusher, someone that's at least 260 pounds. And now with Brandon Staley coming in, that's not necessarily a requirement anymore. Maybe you're looking for some more explosive guys off the edge that can get after the quarterback quickly. I would say here that I experimented with this today in my mock, and I like it. I think Jalen Walker is going to end up going high in the draft, and I think that number 9 is a good landing spot for him. He's another high-character guy, big work ethic, leader in the locker room by all accounts, and also super extreme upside. Offers you a little bit of versatility, but I think he's going to be an every down edge in the league that can offer you, upside maybe as a quarterback spy. Not really sure he's going to be much more than like a spot dropper. I'm not sure he's going to be, a true coverage linebacker, but as someone that can be your 3-4 edge, occasionally do some other things, but offers you upside as a pass rusher. I mean, he's just so explosive off the edge. I think he's going to be somebody that teams covet for a number of reasons. And I think he's got a really good chance to go in the top 10. I think the Saints are going to find a lot to like in Jalen Walker.
I'm going to be honest. I think there's a chance this take ages poorly fairly quickly because I think Jalen Walker will tear up the combine. I want to preface this with that. I am not a huge fan of him at edge. I wasn't the biggest fan of the tool bag that we saw during his time at Georgia, and he had a couple of sacks against your Longhorns, and one was a play where Quinn Ewers dropped back quite a bit in the pocket, and that was not on Kelvin. Right, it was not on Kelvin Banks, despite it in theory being on Kelvin Banks. And Kelvin kind of looked up after the play and he kind of gave like the hands, like, "Are you serious?" And then there was another play where you mentioned the spot drop with Jalen Walker, where the time to throw on the play was over like 5.8 seconds, and that was 2 of his 6.5 sacks on the year, and they need another of his 6.5 sacks. That was another 5+ second play. I'm not the biggest fan of Jalen Walker at edge right now, and I think that people want to automatically, because he's 6'2", 245, and just kind of project that, okay, well, Michael Parsons was that coming out of Penn State. Like he's going to test really well. I do think he will test really well, but right now I think he's more of an off ball. I think he compares favorably to Frankie Louvu, and I like Jalen Walker as a prospect a lot, just not as an edge, but I wish him the best. I would gladly be proven wrong with that. But with the Bears on the clock at pick 10, I think this is all about the beef. Ben Johnson, of course, saw what the beef can do in Detroit. And right now, I think Tyler Booker is a little underappreciated. I think Tyler Booker is a pretty clean prospect. I think he's just a good football player and kind of think about everything else later. And if you can have that type of player along your offensive line and also have Darnell Wright along your offensive line and have 2 really big boys that are each north of 320 and not have to worry about that position for the next couple of years, I think that is setting the tone with Ben Johnson's first draft pick as head coach of the Bears.
I think you have a similar type of conversation here at 11 with the 49ers. I think it's going to be something in the trenches on either side of the ball. I think Membu is certainly in play. I think Walter Nolan is in play. You know, you have 2 really high upside, super athletic guys. 2 guys are probably, to your point, with Jalen Walker or Mike Green, going to tear up the combine. Going to be some true standouts. I think it just depends. What do you want here? I think Nolan is going to be such a riser that it's easy to put Mason Graham as DT1 in this class. And I think I'd probably share that because of the down-to-down consistency. But Nolan really flashes as a pass rusher, and that is so valuable. I'm going to go Walter Nolan here at 11 to the 49ers. The prospect pedigree is insane with him. Took him a little while to get going, but this past season after he transferred from A&M to Ole Miss, just exploded out onto the scene, which is a really good way to describe his play as well. Twitchy, explosive on the interior. On the ground a little bit too much probably for me, but his upside as a pass rusher is immense. Losing Javon Hargrave, I feel like he's going to be a pretty good replacement.
I do too, and I also love the idea of the pairing of Walter Nolan and Nick Bosa, and to be able to have those guys presumably divisional round of the playoffs, because I think they're going to get back this year. 3rd and 9, 2 minutes left in the game. Who do you want to get after the quarterback? And if I can have both of those guys get after the quarterback, then we're sitting pretty in that specific situation. Now, with the Cowboys on the clock here, Genty is gone, but they have a pretty big need at wide receiver 2. I do think Luther Burden will get back to the player that he was in 2023. And the kind of the process of building a good football team is having great players on rookie contracts. The 49ers did that over the past 4 years with Brock Purdy, and now they're going to have to pay him. And obviously we see that with not necessarily the Eagles, but we see that with other teams, the Chiefs right now with the 2021 and the 2022 draft classes where nobody's been paid yet. And that's going to change in a big way. And if you can have a player that could go for over 1,000 yards in Luther Burden while having a legitimate wide receiver 2 behind CeeDee Lamb, I think it boils down to bringing in a good player and also, in the Cowboys case, improving the roster as well.
The Dolphins at 13, a lot of really good players available. I am tempted to go Tyler Warren here because Jonnu Smith is not under contract long-term, and I don't necessarily think you need to go offensive line at 13. We do have free agency coming up. There are some holes that you can patch for sure. And It's, do you want to go that direction, or do you want to take an offensive lineman here at 13? Obviously, we can't know right now because the draft here that we're doing is before free agency, but I'm going to experiment with the possibility that they choose to upgrade the offensive line through free agency, and in the draft go with, something that's not going to be available on the open market, and that is Penn State's Tyler Warren. He can block a little bit, but is certainly a weapon in the passing game, and I think is going to give Mike McDaniel a fun player to throw into the offensive scheme.
I'm going to be honest, that was going to be my pick for Indy, so that's throws a wrench into plans. But I'd love to pair Warren with AR and basically say, if you can't hit this target, then something's wrong in year 3. But as much as I'd love to give, I'm not going to go Colston Loveland here at 14, but what I think I am going to do, and I'm curious what you think on this, but right now I think Will Johnson would be the selection. Just a good football player. Bengal. I think Will Johnson would be the selection, by the way. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that is something I've been doing actually recently. I think the past couple mock drafts have had Will Johnson at number 14 to Indianapolis. I think he ultimately ends up going a little bit higher than this, but pre-combine, stock's a little bit down with the injury, with maybe some lackluster 2024 film. I think that if he comes out, runs really anywhere in the 4.4s, that we're going to start talking about him like he's a lock top 10 pick again. And I don't really value the combine that much. I think a lot of it is just, it's the underwear Olympics, but these things are all valuable. Like, the more pieces you can have to the puzzle, the better. And I do think that right now, if you can check off the Will Johnson long speed box, he's going to just go higher than this. But right now, there might be a chance he's available even further down the board than this. So Will Johnson at 14, I actually like a ton. And I think there's a chance he's available. As we get to the Falcons at 15, you got to upgrade the pass rush. And they don't do it. You look at Terry Fontenot, he's gone 4 different skill positions in his first 4 drafts. It was Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan, and now Michael Penix. Will he finally address the defense side of the ball high in the draft? I'm going to say yes. There are so many good edge rushers in this draft. There's help on the interior defensive line if you want to go that way. There is a really good off-ball linebacker in Jahad Campbell, super freak athlete. I'm going to go Mykel Williams here. He was derailed by injury in 2024, but the potential is so immense with him. Get to keep him in state as well. I know the Falcons also seem to avoid Georgia players, which over the past few years is maybe not a good idea considering how good they've been and how they've produced top-tier NFL talent. But Mykel Williams is someone that his best football is probably ahead of him. He was still productive, even playing injured the entire year. Certainly, to your point with Jalen Walker, saw it against Texas. Same with Mykel Williams. But yeah, Terry Fontenot finally grabs an edge in the draft. This will be the year. Probably not, but maybe.
I like it. And there was a stat that somebody posted the other day. It was something to the effect of the Falcons finished 31st last year in either sacks or pressures. They were 31st in the last 10 years, or 32nd in the last 10 years, and 32nd in the last 20 years in sacks as a team. And it was basically like a stat that it's true that couldn't believe, like basically not the onion regarding the Atlanta Falcons pass rush. So with Arizona on the clock here, I go back to their game plan in terms of their long-term build, in terms of everything they've been doing since Jonathan Gannon became the coach. And I know they selected Darius Robinson last year, but I think going back to the trenches and watching what the Eagles did in the Super Bowl leads me to believe that Kenneth Grant going to Arizona would make a lot of sense. But I think you could also look to try and flip Calvin Banks at right tackle. I like Calvin Banks a lot. I did a mock recently on another channel, and I went with Kenneth Grant. So I'm going to switch it up here. I'm going to go with Calvin Banks at 16. Bring him in as a right tackle and have your duo of the future with Paris Johnson and Calvin Banks. I think Calvin Banks is a pretty seamless prospect. He's really good. He's really athletic. He has a really sturdy anchor. He's a pretty, I don't want to say flawless because that's a loaded word, but he's a really clean prospect. Like his game a lot, and I think he will be a quality starter for the next several years.
For the Bengals at 17, I really feel like you can't go wrong here as long as it's defense. I also think guard is in play, to be honest, but their defense, they have needs at all three levels. I think especially, though, in the front seven. Malachi Starks is tough to turn down at this point, but Jermaine Pratt was, thought to be released coming up here pretty soon. He's requested a trade. Linebackers in need, and Jihad Campbell is a player I'm really, really high on, and he's going to be my selection here at 17. We saw a lot of the best edge rushers in the draft go off the board. There's a bit of a run there from like 8 to 17 now or just before. So,
yes,
I think that there's a scenario where they opt to go and address defensive line in round 2. There should be a lot of really good defensive linemen available in that range. Talking about guys like Princely Umanmielen, I think has some pretty big potential. Maybe even Nick Scorton gets there if you see a real fall, but there are a lot of really good. I mean, Jared Ivey from Ole Miss. Ole Miss has like an unbelievable entire defensive line that are probably all going to go inside the top 100 picks. But Jihad Campbell at linebacker, I think one of the better players in the draft, big time upside, and I like his fit on this defense.
I do as well. And with Seattle here in the clock at pick 18, I feel like has to be interior offensive line. I feel like Seahawks fans would be pretty upset. I'm curious, what is the feedback you get if you do not? Have you taken a non-interior offensive lineman with the Seahawks, and what has the feedback been if you have not done that?
I do almost every time.
Okay.
And the reason being, and I recognize that they need it, right? They absolutely do. But I like to look at, general manager draft history as well when I do these mock drafts. And I like to look at what these guys are saying. And John Schneider of the Seahawks has come out and said a lot that, guard is the most overdrafted, overpaid position in the NFL. And you look at his draft history, it backs it up. He's not taken an interior offensive lineman in the first round, I think, in his entire tenure. I think it was Max Unger, first round pick. That might have preceded John Schneider.
I remember
point is that they haven't done it. They haven't done it in a really long time. And this might be the year that they go a different direction. They have probably the worst interior offensive line in football. This would be a good year to do it. And they're in a good spot to do it. If, a guy like Tyler Booker gets there, Membu in this case, it's tough to go a different direction. But I often find myself giving them, a stray edge rusher that falls. Sometimes it's a tackle, depending on how you feel about Abraham Lucas long-term with some injury stuff. Sometimes it's Jihad Campbell. I think I've gone with Nick Worry, before. You try to feed into that Camp Chancellor type vibe, even though he's a way better athlete. I don't know. I've gone a lot of different directions here just because I have to say, hey, it's not what you need necessarily, but what they're going to do. And they're a tough team. Sometimes it's even, Tyler Warren if he gets there at 18. Long-winded answer to say I've gone a bunch of different ways.
Right. So I have not mocked. This is the first mock where he's actually fell this far. I would like to think Armand Membu is going to be a tackle at the NFL level. But like you said, and it was a great point with questions surrounding Abe Lucas's long-term health at this point. We wish him the best, of course. But worst case, you have a really, really good guard. You're going to have a good tackle, and in the worst case, you have a really good guard, which also helps the offensive line. But I think you are drafting a good football player, and I think that's kind of the Mike Macdonald process, if you will. And I know John Schneider is obviously the GM making the decisions, but you get the point. And I think this kind of would go back to the thought process of what Mike Macdonald's previous GM in Baltimore did in Eric DeCosta, where you just take a good football player and don't overthink the process. And Kyle Hamilton is kind of one that I go back to, and even Tyler Linderbaum. I mean, the Ravens killed the 2022 draft where they let players that were top 5 or 10 talents, 5 in Hamilton and 10 in Linderbaum's case, and just let them fall to the board, and we'll just scoop them up and have everybody else just have to go against those guys for the next several years. So I'm going to take Armand Membu at pick 18.
Definitely like that. And also IDL has been a spot for me as well with their free agent situations. The Bucs really need to improve their pass rush. Linebacker is a big position of need as well. I've gone Jihad Campbell here a lot, but I forced him off the board at 17. What happens if that happens? And their pass rush, specifically off the edge, is just no good, really. They have a couple of players to like, or really just one at this point. Like Tryon Shoyinka is hitting free agency. Shaq Barrett's gone. And Yaya Diaby has kind of been a really nice player. This is a weird spot. I have Shamar Stewart off the board here a lot earlier, typically, but I also don't think he's the best fit for the defense of the players available. if I want to really upgrade the pass rush, I'm going James Pierce here. And that's ultimately what I'm going to do. Stewart is athletic enough to play off the edge in a 3-4, I think. I just think under Todd Bowles, the explosiveness and pure pass rush ability of James Pierce makes a little bit more sense. Stewart's got a ton of upside, though. It's going to be interesting to see what you think about him. But yeah, Pierce here is the pick at 19.
No, I love Pierce. And when you have this the attacking defense that Bowles does, and when you can have a not necessarily duo, although this kind of applies, but when you have James Pierce and Kalijah Cansey on the same defense, and then just an absolute mountain of a man in the middle in Vita Vea, and then I like it. I like it. And Bowles would love to be able to get home with 4, and James Pierce certainly attributes to that goal, or it certainly attributes to that thought process. So with Denver on the clock here, Bo Nix obviously had a great, phenomenal rookie season, 34 total touchdowns. They went to the playoffs for the first time since they won the Super Bowl back in 2015. But I would also, I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I think you would agree with this, but it's probably going to be the worst supporting cast that Bo Nix has in his next 3 or 4 years of his career. At least I would hope. With Emeka Egbuka, with Matthew Golden staring them both in the face, I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka. I think his floor is incredibly high, and I would be pretty surprised if he's not a 60, 65 catch guy per year. I don't think he has the highest ceiling. I mean, there's a reason he's coming off of pick 20 rather than pick 5 or 6 in the draft. But I think he's just a really good football player, really good route runner, really good hands. He does everything right. And when you list his weaknesses, honestly, the really the only weaknesses in his game to me are that he's not, elite at really anything. He's kind of a jack of all trades. I like his game a lot, and I think Sean Payton would too.
Yeah, and Sean Payton loves an Ohio State receiver. Emeka Egbuka is, a super high floor player. And he was a common pick for me to the Steelers at 21, but they often don't take receiver in the first round. So it's what do you do here? Because I'd like to get Matthew Golden off the board and throw the horns up. However, I don't think they do that, right? I think that they could opt to go somewhere on the defensive line. You have an aging Cam Hayward, even though he's been one of the best players in the league silently over the past 10 years. I like the DBs that are available. I really do. I think Jahdae Barron fits a ton as a Steeler. Just so instinctive, hard-nosed, find the football, make a play. He fits in the nickel. I mean, you loved Mike Hilton there for so many years in Pittsburgh.
Love this.
Jahdae Barron is a good fit. I'm not going to do that, though. I'm going to see if I can rile him up in the chat and give him something they're not used to. I'm going to go Shamar Stewart. I'm really, really high on him as a player. And in this scenario, he's not going to be an edge rusher for the Steelers. You have a lot off the edge that you can really be excited about. Obviously, Watt, Herbig, Highsmith, maybe not in that order, but some really good pass rushers just truly off the edge. But at interior, you start to get some more long-term questions. Stewart's potential is so high, and at 280 plus pounds, you don't see guys move the way he does. He really is an unbelievable athlete, all things considered. And long-term, give him a chance to develop, learn behind Cam Hayward. I think it's a really, really fun fit to a team that seems unlikely to go receiver here. I think it will be something on the defense side of the ball. I think, getting Fautanu back from injury, you don't really need to address the offensive line at this spot, but maybe if you chose to, Josh Simmons is a fun fit. But no, I'm going to go Shamar Stewart here.
I like the pick, and it's also good. I would say it's really great general managing by Omar Khan to draft a position kind of a year in advance. And I really, by the way, I did love the Jahdae Barron comp to Mike Hilton. I think that is a phenomenal comp. I love Jahdae Barron. He is one of my guys in this class. I loved watching him. I loved watching Sandra Still during Michigan's national championship run. Just really, really good football players. With the Chargers on the clock, I'm a big Justin Herbert fan, and I'm going to give him some help. If you want to throw him up, go ahead. It's Matthew Golden from Texas. Good football player, solid, and I am a big fan of just duos that I can root for the next couple of years. And Ladd McConkey and Matthew Golden, solid duo. Chargers are building a solid team, and I also want to point out that I would not hate the idea of Colston Loveland to go to the Chargers here. Obviously, we know about the Michigan connection with Jim Harbaugh, and It would also be addressing a big need, as the Chargers tight end room was not great in 2024, which would be quite the understatement. But we're going to go with Matthew Golden in this mock.
This actually works out, so you get the Vikings and I get the Giants as well. What a fun combo. Packers at 23. Oftentimes I've gone to Jahdae Barron here, but he's more of like, he's not really a true boundary, right? Like I think he's very similar in the way that Brian Branch was kind of undervalued, and then, teams found out they made a mistake pretty quickly, letting Brian Branch slip to 45. But nickel / corner or / safety is kind of an undervalued set of positions now in the NFL. So I don't know if Jahdae Barron is a first-round pick as much as I like him as a player. I think the Packers here might be looking for, if they're going to go corner, maybe like more of a true boundary. And there are a couple at this point. You look at, Hafley in there in Green Bay, you're looking at more of the longer press corners. And I think that it's harder to find more upside than Savone Revel in this draft. He, of course, got hurt in 2024. Obviously couldn't continue to put out great tape, but he was, prior to injury, he's way more of a cover guy than a, come down and tackle guy. But I really think tackling is secondary for a corner. If I want to lock down CB1, can you run with anybody? Can you stay in phase? What are your cover skills like? And Revel's got some of the best in this draft. And I think for the Packers, he can play bump and run. He can press on the outside. He's going to have long arms, run as fast as anybody. I don't think he's going to run at the combine due to injury, but this is like a low 4.3 guy. And that's insane to match cover skills. So I think it's just a really good fit there in Green Bay. They need corner badly.
I agree. And anytime you would take a corner for any team in this division, I mean, there's receivers everywhere, whether it's Jefferson and Addison, whether it's Amon-Ra and J-Mo, DJ and Rome, and then the Packers, their quartet of guys, if you will, and hopefully Christian Watson gets back healthy soon. But no, there's receivers everywhere, and especially in the Packers case when you have to defend quite literally everybody in the division. And like the pick, I'm definitely not going to push back at all. I think there's a decent chance that they draft Nick Scorton. I think he would be a guy that they like, just a powerful edge that can also really set a hard edge in the run game while also being able to get after the quarterback. I like Scorton a lot. I know he had a down 2024, but he'll only be 20 years old on draft night. Really, really like Nick Scorton's game. He'll be coming off the board pretty soon, I would say. But with the Vikings on the clock, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if there's anything more frustrating. And this didn't happen this year for Minnesota, at least defensively, too often. But I don't know if there's anything more frustrating than seeing your team just get pounded in the run game, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Just in the trenches, just basically watch a team like the Eagles just run for 150, 200 yards, just inside zone all game. You can't stop it just because they are bigger and stronger and faster than you. And I'm going to take Kenneth Grant. And if you can have Kenneth Grant on the interior, I know Harrison Phillips is there, but if you can have him along the interior defensive line, and we just drafted Dallas Turner last year, also have Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard coming back, it's a good defense. I would not be upset with Jahdae Barron, of course. That would be fine. If you wanted to have an alternate selection, I would gladly take Jahdae Barron as well. But Kenneth Grant, big, beefy guy along the interior, and got to be able to set the tone. And I think he's just a really, really good football player, and he would be a really good player for the Vikings.
Tough to get bigger than him at like 340 pounds. Texans at 25. I would love to get Josh Simmons off the board, but I'm really looking for someone more on the interior. I know the Texans really like Blake Fisher at right tackle, and Emery Tunsil's not really going anywhere. So I'm going to take a Senior Bowl standout. I'm going to go Gray Zabel, and he's plug and play somewhere on the interior. He played tackle at North Dakota State, but this is likely a guard or even a center in the NFL. He's got incredibly short arms. I think they're sub 32 inches or something like that. So he's not going to be an NFL tackle, but the Texans need to protect CJ Stroud, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden off the board. Can't really go with a receiver. It's probably got to be Gray Zabel. Well, or something on the O-line in this case.
No, I like the pick, and I tweeted out a video of CJ Stroud today, just basically why did CJ Stroud struggle in 2024, and it was a clip of Quinnen Williams just basically decleating Kenyon Green and walking him right back into CJ's lap. It was not good. Speaking of Senior Bowl standouts, we got to get you down to Mobile next year. It's a good time. Everybody would enjoy having you there. So just saying what everybody was thinking, why we were down in Mobile.
Everybody, I'm sure.
Everybody. It was, I mean, everybody was on the field. They were chanting Bengal on the field for you to be there. So they didn't show
Yeah.
it. They didn't show it because they didn't want
Cameras
you to
were
have
off, unfortunately. But
right.
yeah, it
Yeah,
for sure happened.
everybody was. The players were there. I know they were taking their helmets off, just looking up in the crowd for you. But everybody wanted you there, dude. So we got to get you there next year. But with the Rams on the clock, I think there's two choices here. Jahdae Barron, great football player. Actually, three choices. Josh Simmons, injury is going to be the big one here. I think he's long gone if everything's good. And the other choice here, I think, would be Colston Loveland to give Sean McVay a really, really good tight end. And when you look at Cooper Kupp probably not being on the roster next year, I think bringing in another good pass catcher would be obviously wise for the Rams. So I think if you can have your choice here of Jahdae Barron, Josh Simmons, Colston Loveland. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Jahdae Barron just to upgrade the secondary for the Rams. I think he's a real. I mean, we had the Jahdae Barron discussion. There's very little that he does in his game that's just bad. I mean, he's such a high IQ player. He's really, really good at nearly everything. And if you can bring in that type of guy at pick 26, I'm all for it every time.
How does this always happen for the Ravens? It's like a dream board.
Oh, yeah.
So many good players available, but I think two are standing out in particular. So top two names there on the board. It's Malachi Starks and Josh Simmons. Starks gives you a ton of versatility in the back end. I'm going to go with Josh Simmons here, though. I think he's better than the 27th best player in the draft, fairly significantly. Prior to injury, this guy was playing like the best tackle in the draft. He's super athletic. How does he bounce back from injury? That's going to be the big question. But this lets him really rehab and come back 100%, right? You've still got Ronnie Stanley now for the time being. Roger Rosengarten, you're hoping, is going to end up being your right tackle of the future. But we know you need to protect Lamar Jackson long-term. And Josh Simmons is such a great player based off of, the first couple of months playing at Ohio State this past season. The Ravens, are such a talented team, but it's all because of Lamar Jackson in the end. That guy's an MVP level player. Got to protect him. Simmons is the pick.
Love it. I love it. And I actually wouldn't think it would be, I don't want to get too far down the road, but it wouldn't be I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say he would be Lamar's teammate until he's probably 34, 35 years old. He's plug and play. Don't overthink it. Love the pick. With the Lions up here, there's several directions I'm looking at, but ultimately I'm going to go with Nick Scorton. I think he would be a phenomenal Robin to Aiden Hutchinson's Batman. Hutch was on such a just stupid pace this year. He had 45 pressures on 198 pass rushing snaps. Now, that pace would not have kept up because that would have been, like 180 pressure season over the course of a year, which would have broke several records. But he was on such a ridiculous pace. And if they can get just a legitimate Robin, a long-term Robin, because I know Za'Darius is there right now, and I know Za'Darius Smith he likes Detroit at the moment, and that would be the plan for 2025, but you can never have enough pass rush. And unfortunately, the Lions defense dealt with countless injuries throughout the 2024 season. So if you can bring in a really good player in Scorton, who again, I do believe is a little undervalued right now, and a guy that they could absolutely develop because he's one of the youngest prospects in the class, I think it's a win-win for the Lions in this scenario.
Commanders at 29. I really want to get Malachi Starks off the board, but he's just not a fit. I think I'm going to go with Josh Connerly. Is he the best tackle available? Probably is.
I'm a Connerly guy.
Yeah, I mean, he had a pretty good Senior Bowl overall. Of course, there's the Mike Green Bull Rush highlight, but you got to protect Jaden Daniels long-term. Their O-line played fairly well in 2024, but I think long-term you can look to upgrade, and Josh Connerly ends up being your left tackle of the future in this scenario. Got to protect Jaden Daniels. I mean, he could also do better protecting himself, but Connerly for sure, I think, is a solid selection here at 29. I think he's probably a first-round pick. I don't think he falls outside the top 40. So somewhere in the 20 to 35 range probably is where he's going to find a home. And I think it's just the best player available for the Commanders at this point.
I like it. And with Buffalo up here, I'm not going to choose him, but I want to point out that this could happen based on how contract negotiations are going right now. I don't think Omarion Hampton is out of the question with the James Cook, everything, how that's playing out right now, how he has basically said that $15 million is the price that he wants. And obviously we know about running backs' shelf lives in the NFL. And James older brother Dalvin is kind of a perfect example of that. So I don't think Omarion Hampton's out of the question entirely. Now, I don't think they will go with Omarion Hampton here, but I'm going to go with Derek Harmon. You can get both bigger and better along the defensive line, and it goes back to drafting a good football player. And I don't think Derek Harmon is going to be the missing piece, the single missing piece to propel you over the Kansas City hump. But, if you can chip away at that mountain, and if you can, bring in a good football player and just chip away at the mountain, and just, we're going to continue to build the best roster that we can. I think Derek Harmon plays that role perfectly in this scenario.
I mean, I know the Chiefs need a tackle. There's just not one here. I mean, you're going to talk about Ariante Ursary, maybe. Donovan Jackson, maybe, right? But I think we saw what the Chiefs did playing a guard at tackle this past season. Donovan Jackson was great at Ohio State, when Simmons went down. But I'm not going Cam Williams at 31. He just fell off in too big of a way. This guy's a penalty a game, if not an even higher rate than that. I think I'm going to go somewhere on the defensive line. And I mean, Darius Alexander is quite intriguing. You have so many good interior defensive linemen available. That's ultimately where I'm going to go. Yeah, I think you talk about Darius Alexander being one of the fastest risers, big Senior Bowl standout. And what was most impressive about him is when they moved him off the edge, he was still wreaking havoc. And you think, okay, small school guy, maybe he's a bit undersized, shorter arms. Can he really play, in the trenches in the NFL? But he's not undersized. He has long enough arms. I think they're verified 34 plus inches at well over 300 pounds. I think like 308. I mean, it's like well over, but 6'4", versatility across the defensive line. And now you have somebody to worry about on the inside that isn't Chris Jones. So I think Darius Alexander, to me, is just one of the guys that makes the most sense at this point. Like, yeah, you can talk about Colston Loveland, get another receiver in the mix, which is what I'm going to call him. But that's kind of what Travis Kelce is, right? So maybe that's in play, but I think they have some other options already in-house. It's a really talented tight end class. I don't know that you need to do that at 31, but Loveland being available definitely is intriguing. But yeah, Alexander's a fast riser, like him a lot. Could be a first-round guy. Also could see him going at the back end of the second round. It's an interesting pick.
There's going to be a lot of guys. I think this is actually, it opens up a really broad discussion where there's going to be a lot of guys this year that are in that 25 to 75 range where there's not that much of a drop off. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a guy that's 68th on a board that goes 31st and likewise. So I'm eager to see who that player will be, or players in that case. But with the Eagles here at pick 32, Trey Amos is a player. I mean, it's just the Eagles are in a position where they can take not nearly, but several positions, and it would make a lot of sense. Ultimately, the player that I am going to go with Josh Sweat potentially leaving in free agency, is just a Howie Roseman class here. We're going to draft Princely Umanmielen. I think his game compares, not all that favorably, but I see a little bit of Zadarius Smith in his game, and I like him a lot. It would be a classic. We're going to attack the trenches, and in a couple of years, you're going to see why this selection panned out. And it didn't even take a couple of years for a third-round pick last year in Jalen Hunt to see that already pan out in the Super Bowl, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that type of contribution from Princely next January. So that will wrap up today's mock. Bengal, appreciate you joining. Appreciate you coming onto the channel, and again, you're tied all-time guest appearances, so appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.